early to tell, and when they presented this, they discussed that this is an illustrative plan.
It is
I'm sure
an
they could tell you
illustrative
from the
plan, but
illustrative plan the number of units that they're envisioning on that plan.
they are still they do have numbers in mind. They have an intent and they have a master plan. And when you have an intent and a master plan, you just don't go, well, there'll be something there. They do have an intent, they have a master plan, they have design guidelines. I have read every word of what they have written. And in fact, I have looked up every single project that this architecture firm has worked on in the past 15 years or so. I have looked up reviews of every single multifamily project that they have worked on from people actually living in those places. So I really think that this is something that they can address right now.
Right, it's a conceptual site plan too, keep that in mind, and
Yes.
it's a moving target. I was the one that wrote the letter, so the numbers that were in the letter I took from the traffic study that was done. And I know I saw the same discrepancy that you did. It said 500 townhouses, but when you look on the plan, you don't see those. So,
well, for the traffic study, it doesn't matter one way or another. Unit is a unit, but I was just wondering if
I'll address it.
Thanks.
The real answer to your question is, we don't know. Okay, we really don't. It's the intent to have up to 500 townhomes. We don't show 500 townhomes.
No.
And the reason that we don't show 500 townhomes is not because we don't want 500 townhomes. We created a plan, which is an illustrative plan, that's just supposed to show how could someone get 2,500 units on this site. If there are 500 townhomes on this plan, there will not be 2,500 units, because a townhome gets developed at 8 units to the acre, whereas apartments get developed at 30 units to the acre. So it's a math game. So the real answer to your question is, sitting right here, right now, we don't know how many townhomes there will be. However, the plan makes provision for as many as 500, meaning there won't be more than 500. But currently, and what we're hearing from the development community, is townhomes is the most desirable product.
Yes,
and so in reality, the way this probably will evolve is that more developers will want to do townhomes, which means the number will probably be closer to 500 as opposed to the approximately 150 that we're showing. So that's the answer. The answer is we don't know, but we think it'll be closer to 500 than to 150.
Okay, so for rentals, the rentals will be anywhere between 1,000 to 2,400, because if you have that plan, that gets you to. So
we have upper limits. That's all we have.
Your upper limit for total number of units is 2,500. To be able to fit in 2,500 units, only roughly 100 of them can be townhomes or
not necessarily.
condos.
Not necessarily. If we were directed to create a plan that has 500 units, townhome units, and 2,500 units total, we could do that. But it would mean maybe more wrap buildings, or maybe more 5-story buildings, or some other combination of units could create a plan that has 2,500 units with 500 townhomes. But the answer is it's going to be market-driven, not developer-driven.
Okay,
that's the answer.
Okay, I saw quite a few hands up. The gentleman there in the middle. Yes.
You said long-term. How many years? 20, 25?
Yeah, easily.
Sandy?
So you said you had an upper limit, but do you have a lower limit? Such that if a developer was to come to you and propose to buy one of those sections in the neighborhood, or the whole neighborhood, and they said, well, we want to really make this sustainable and livable and LEED and environmentally sensitive. We just want to put maybe 10 single-family homes with 1 to 3 acres for each. Would you approve that?
No.
And why not?
Well, if you've read the design guidelines,
I haven't.
there's no provision for single family in the design guidelines. So
Why
first of
couldn't
all,
there
single
be?
family is not allowed.
But why couldn't there be?
That's a good point. I mean, I guess the concern that you're saying, and what the previous person to your left said, really is to have a better understanding of what the neighborhood is comprised of. And I think if going forward, if the community has specific suggestions about defining the character of the neighborhood, that's the kind of input that will be valuable, because we're not trying to say that this is, the illustrative plan is the only plan that's going to go here. They said there's multiple parameters. And so what we're going to do, I don't think we need to decide it now or argue about it, but the point is that maybe there should be a variety of units, some that maybe appeal to different home buyers that are not currently in the plan that they're showing. So I think that point is well understood. I don't think we're going to be able to answer it though tonight. Let's go to this side of the room, sir.
One of the things, my question is traffic. And I heard the presentation and it scared me to death. One of the things that was said was everything that was required to mitigate the traffic has already been done. I'm just going to guess. Not a single member of this design team lives in the area of the intersection of Route 3 and Melford, or, you know, anywhere close by. I happen to live right in the section of Bowie that abuts Melford. The thing that scared me the most was the statement, but we've only reached 60% occupancy. And it's already a problem. You have a single choke point, and all you have to do is go out on Route 3 or Route 301, and it's a parking lot. And it's going to get worse by a factor of almost 2. Tell me how that's going to be mitigated and with a single choke point and no other outlet to handle this traffic.
I mean, I'm not here to defend.
I understand, but you're the planning.
It is the county's guidelines that allow for the mitigation that they mentioned. Mitigation is a certain allowance on certain roads that are more regional in nature, where property owners in this county shouldn't be held completely accountable for all the traffic that comes by from outside the county. So the county council has allowed in their guidelines mitigation. Mitigation in this instance is that you have to take your trips from your site, whatever that number is, and you have to make improvements that mitigate 150% of your trips. So you're correcting some problems and 50% more. So I know they don't live in the area, but we certainly drive the roads in Bowie, and I know that you probably know that the intersection of 450 and Route 3 has always been a bottleneck. At one point, there was an additional lane added, and in both directions as you get to the intersection. And that additional lane has allowed a lot more traffic to pass through more smoothly. Granted, there's congestion all the time, but the widening and the lane widening on both directions was done by this developer, and it has improved that situation dramatically. Likewise, when you come out of Bowie Gateway, where the Target is, when you wanted to make a left to go north on Route 3, it used to really stack up, and they came in and built a separate left turn lane. So now you have much more capacity there to move the traffic through the intersection. On the opposite side of the road, Governor Bridge Road, it used to back all the way up. They made the improvement there to provide a free turn out of there. So those are the kinds of mitigating improvements, and the county's guidelines force them to look at the intersections and the levels of operations at the intersections. And like I said, they have to mitigate all of their trips plus 50%. They've done that. So, you know, nobody likes more traffic, but I think you have to look at the numbers that were presented, the fact that the project has already been approved at a certain level. They're not exceeding the level that they were approved at. They're just repurposing the trips and providing for a more equitable distribution so that all the traffic isn't going in one direction at one time of day and the same in the opposite time of day. So I don't know if that's a great satisfactory answer to you, but it's an explanation, and it goes back to the fact that the county's guidelines permit the mitigation. And so they're playing by the rules. You had a question, ma'am?
Yes, I have a question. We've looked at traffic, you've looked at environmental. What has been done for the educational aspect? If we're putting in 2,500 townhomes, We already have overcrowded middle schools, and our high school is beyond bursting at the seams.
Well, we had similar questions asked back in the hearings that were held in 2013, and the city manager, who's with us tonight, prepared a memo for the city council that discussed a lot of these impacts. With respect to the schools, there is declining enrollment. When you look at the enrollment numbers, not at the high school level, but at the middle school level and the elementary school level, that is a fact. The county council has also approved or put into place a system of surcharges. So for every new house built, the developer has to pay a surcharge of about $15,000 or probably $16,000 per unit. And that's supposed to be a fee that the Board of Ed collects so that they can make whatever capacity improvements they need to make at whatever schools will relieve whatever overcrowding or issues that exist. So it's a fee collection system. That's how the county council has set it up, and the school system is benefiting from that. So a development of 2,500 units, minus the senior units, which don't have to pay the fee, but all of the other units would have to, is going to generate quite a bit of money for the school system. So Dave, I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, let me just make a couple of additional points. Thank you all for coming tonight. One flaw in the surcharge regulation that folks generally like to point out pretty quickly is that there's no mandate that the dollars collected by the county get spent in the area that generated those dollars. I want to put that out there. That's the reality of the program. But the other point that was made a year ago when these details were being discussed in terms of the prospect for residential was to recognize that this is a long-term project. Nobody knows the exact build-out time frame, but if it's 5, 10, 15, or 20 years, the impact on the schools is going to be spread out over that time period. Yeah, there are some crowding at some points in the school system now, but we also have some incredible excess capacity at the elementary level. So I think there's a cycling that happens. Our city council routinely takes a position on school board budget issues every year and argues for greater capacity in local schools. We'll continue to do that. So it's an important issue, but I think it's important to realize that the 2,000 units that may have some children, not as many as a 2,000 single-family home unit, because it's just the fact that these kinds of units don't generate that many children, are not going to happen all at once. And, you know, we don't know what that time frame is, but that's kind of how we were able to look at it, as saying, well, it's not going to be a huge slug of additional students, you know, knocking on the doors of the local schools on Labor Day of a single year anytime soon. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Let's take another question on this side. Sir, in the back? Yes.
I was wondering whether the renderings are actually to scale, because it doesn't seem to me like there's that much room. I work in the park.
Yes, they are to scale.
They are to scale. Ma'am, you have a question?
Yes, and I apologize if my question has been answered. I came in late, but I wanted to make a statement tangential to what the gentleman raised in terms of traffic. The one thing that strikes me about Melford is that there is only one entrance and exit. And my question is, what happens when that one exit is blocked for some reason and somebody has to die? Do we have to go through a tragedy before we have to build a second entrance and exit to that property?
Let's allow the traffic engineer to answer that question for you.
Melford Boulevard is designed as a 4 to 6 lane divided roadway. There are many locations with one entrance that when there is an emergency, if there's an accident that closes down one side of the roadway, typically an accident won't close down. You know, if you've got a roadway that's 100 feet wide, and an inbound and an outbound sign. Accident occurs on one side. Emergency crews are able to use the other roadway with traffic controls to get in and out if needed. It's kind of a standard practice. It's been done in other locations, and that's how I would expect this to work.
It's not 4-lane anymore, they narrowed it a couple of years ago. Up by the census building.
Well, no, once you get into the community, there's different ways around. If Science you can get around or go down Melford Boulevard. There's two ways to get in once you get through the first
Science
roundabout.
Drive is the one, but once you get past that first traffic circle that's going to limit all of this stuff, it's only 2 lanes on Melford up into where all your retail and offices and stuff.
Right. My point is, once you get past the first roundabout, there's alternate ways to get through the community. You can either take Science or Melford.
Sir, do you have a question?
I do. A lot of emphasis was placed during the presentation about preserving historical sites. And, I realize there's been some effort to at least stabilize, if not restore, the Melford Mansion in and of itself. But I looked at your site rendering, and I see this sight line has been simplified to just eliminate all structures in and around the Melford Mansion.
They're already gone.
What's that?
They're already gone.
No, there's slave cabins. There's a slave cabin.
And the point is that unless somebody's already taken it out, there are brick and mortar walls that, border a formal garden at the rear of which, at one time I heard that also would be preserved. But what I saw tonight was just a slick field. And, all it takes is one bulldozer operator who is not properly instructed, and that could be gone, and my question would be mute.
Right. And we've taken great care of these, and these illustratives don't show to the extent that we're planning for rehabilitation of that site. And stabilization is the first step in that, and that's already begun. I'd like to bring up Kate Coran and briefly speak to that. She's with the archaeology group.
She was the one that I wanted to hear from, because at one time,
well, she's here.
Look, early into this, I was told about a study of the agricultural architecture of the mansion, and I've never heard anything come out of that quote study.
Okay, well, I'll let her address your question.
Okay, the property the historic site that we have right now are 2 discontinuous parcels. The mansion site that includes the main house, there's a slave quarter that was converted to an office, there's a pump house and a meat house. The gardens are to the back. The environmental setting was established when the property was listed in the National Register in 1988. It's also designated as a Prince George's County historic site. They, in that designation, established an environmental setting. That is going to be retained intact. All of those buildings that are currently standing, as well as the gardens, the brick stairs going through the terrace gardens, that's all going to be preserved. There is no major construction anticipated within that area, nor is any major construction anticipated within the Duckett's cemetery, which has a long view from the house. As you know, the house occupies a rise, and the cemetery is off to the right side if you're standing in front.
And I would ask concerning the Duckett Cemetery, and I have no tie to the Duckett family at all. I know about the desecration of the Lansdale burial site here in Bowie, and there had to be, some protections provided in order to keep from that from being recurring. Anything planned for the cemetery?
Well, the cemetery has been surveyed by historic archaeologists. We've done ground penetrating radar so that we can identify where the potential for, if there were any individuals buried outside the fenced area. And the results were presented to the Prince George's County. We have a good understanding of what's going on that site. We've made a commitment to adopt the Prince George's County conservation guidelines for historic cemeteries as the project moves forward. And there is going to be no construction within that area either. Aside from that, what is appropriate for the preservation of the family cemetery.
Okay, thank you. Sir, you got a question?
Somebody that I have talked with in, say, the last year, just to throw out a time frame, if you will, said something to me to the effect of the fact that this project back there was encroaching on federal wetlands. And I'm a little curious as to how that can happen when the federal wetlands are supposed to be restricted and protected for the environmental purposes accordingly. Because there was a place in time where I lived next door in another part of Maryland, and you could not do anything with them other than look at the, scenery.
Right. It's my understanding they're not impacting wetlands, but the environmental consultant is here. Do you want to have that question answered by the person who studied the property?
Good evening, my name is Mike Klobasco. I'm the environmental consultant. The project as proposed should not impact any wetlands or streams. We have environmental buffers currently in place as shown on the NRI plan, and we are going to be staying well away from those areas. So it's all.
How would I be getting information that they're encroaching on like 150,000 square feet of the federal wetlands back there then?
But we're not. We're avoiding the wetlands. The wetlands are in the back. If you'll, I don't have the screen up, but where the green space was, that's where the Patuxent River main stem is. Okay. The wetlands you're referring to are back in this area here. There's there's more to the property here that you're not seeing, but it's not part of this plan. This is the Patuxent River main stem, runs right about here, and all the wetlands are located, for the most part, down in the floodplain here. Where our development is being located is in an upland area outside of anything that's jurisdictional.
All right, well, forgive me, because I'm not trying to monopolize here, but if you will, that outside boundary over there where the pond is, because I'm trying to understand this map, because this is the first time I've been to one of these meetings, if you will. Is that representation of the course of the river? Where's the actual river in conjunction to all this?
Actually, the river on this plan is not shown. It's off the edge of the development, because our development pod is outside of the 100-year floodplain and outside of the Patuxent River and its wetlands. It's actually over in this area here.
How far would you say? And, from the edge there to the river, how far would you say it is?
From the most narrow point, from where you see the pond, the eastern edge of the pond, at the most narrow point to the river is 790 feet. And from the widest point at the same pond to the east side of the pond is 1,100 feet.
All right,
so it's 1,100 and 790 feet away.
If it's 700 feet or whatever that you referred to accordingly, how much flooding would it require to get up to that point before anybody said, oh Lord, I gotta watch out here, this water's getting too close to my home or anything?
Our development is located outside of the 100-year floodplain. That's the standard for development. You got to be outside the 100-year floodplain. We're outside the 100-year floodplain, so it's not going to affect you.
Add one thing, just briefly. And also in furthering conservation and protecting that area, the developer dedicated about 100 acres to the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission as part of the 2006 CSP, again, to help buffer and protect the river and encroachment from development. So just wanted to again remind the group of that.
Thank you.
Okay, let's ask a couple on this side. Gentleman back there.
I have a question. I think when our council leadership here made a decision to embrace this mixed use, it was to hopefully hope a project's been 30 years in the making to spur economic development. Has any studies been done to see what the fiscal impact or benefit this project would have relative to that space, in that we're at 60% capacity now, and that means there's not a lot of desire to do a lot more development there, which means it pretty much it's at its end with regard to generating revenue. I mean, personally, I don't want my taxes going up any more than they have to, and I'm hoping this will be a boom.
It has been done, so.
We addressed that issue that you just raised in the material that was produced for City Council for the meeting last March. I believe all of that material is still available on the city website, is it not, Joe? I don't have the data with me tonight, but I recall that we had projected, and our projections are always conservative on the revenue side. We projected an increase to the tax base of approximately $400 million. Now, that's, again, like the school impact, it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be gradual, and it's going to accrue over the life of the project. But that represents a significant increase in the tax base. The total city tax base in the current fiscal year is $6 billion, so $400 million is equating to an almost 10% increase in the tax base.
Okay, I believe there was another question over on this side. Did you have one here? Yeah, I think I saw your hand.
Okay, yes. I have another question, sorry for the traffic.
No, go ahead, and we'll go.
Okay,
We'll go
I just have a quick question for the traffic engineer. The transportation study said worst case, but my question is, did that worst case start only with the presumption that it would, in fact, that the people in the community would not be commuters like most of the people here? Has a study been done with the assumption that, you know, well, there isn't a school there isn't a daycare there isn't all these other things there, and maybe they have jobs in DC that they're going to because the mixed use didn't quite coalesce?
Yes, the study was done using standard industry practices, which allow for a very small percentage of mixed-use interaction on the site. It's very small, 5%, 10% maybe at the most.
Okay, and what is the total percent traffic volume difference from now? I missed that on it as I was trying to review it today.
I don't have the number right off the top of my head.
Like times now, like 3 times what it is now, 4 times, 5 times? Anything, Robert?
I can get that.
Get that.
I'll come back to that, okay?
Let's go to another question, Mr. Allen.
Thanks, Joe. A couple observations and a specific question of the developer. One is that I'd like to strongly encourage staff and recommend that the city committees, particularly the Environmental Advisory Committee, have a chance to comment on this, because I can see about a half a dozen areas where we can make a comment. I'll mention one that'll highlight and send a message to the developer, and that is the plant list that's included, not in the major part of the presentation, but in the latter part of the additional documents. It even includes, for example, the listing of ash trees in one of the suggested plants. I must admit, I tend to think not only would we insist on native species, but we would insist also that absolutely no ash trees be included in this, with the threat of emerald ash borer horizon for the whole community. But having said that, you may ask me another question about lead ND, since they've made a major point out of lead ND. It's clear that the developers' guidelines seek to have any development that takes place on this site meet those criteria. Is that a fair comment? But since you haven't yet contracted out this development for specific developers to do it, it leads me to 2 questions. Would you be willing to commit to the city that any approved development plan submitted would have to meet those criteria, and ultimately that you would seek certification for this process throughout the entire development period, so that those guidelines were in place. They're likely to change over that period of time, as you know, a lot of these things do. But that lead criteria, however modified, would continue to be a priority consideration and requirement by St. John's for any proposed development.
You asked a pretty long question, so.
I know.
So the other guys, give me come up here. Hold on a second. I'm trying to think about which part of the 7-part question we're going to answer first.
Moderator, while he's thinking about how to answer this gentleman's question, to the transportation expert over there, are they doing anything with long-term projections as far as public transportation and changing any of that comparison to what it is today?
Let me start with that and go back to Mr. Allen. It's a chicken and the egg. Right now, we can't start talking to WMATA about getting bus lanes reconfigured coming down from Crofton because there's no rooftops to pick up any people on the bus. So once we start to move forward and there starts to be more people moving into the site, then it obviously makes more sense that then WMATA has a need to start diving off Route 3 and heading into the site to pick people up. But they're not going to send a bus route there when there's no people sitting in the bus stop. Now, the plan that Mr. Rosen's put together does have all sorts of bus stops and all those types of things incorporated into the site now for the eventual, we hope, the eventual time when WMATA comes in.
And what I'm hearing from you is that they're going to dive off of 3 during rush hour and then buzz into New Carrollton Metro, but they're not going to do anything to accommodate, you know, the increasing traffic and need for people to use public transportation on the west side of 3 north-south corridor.
Well, I mean, Joe and I sat down with the people from WMATA. I mean, it's complicated stuff. They had maps and stuff. I'm just telling you that right now, the easiest route from what I remember, and it was a while ago, was there was a route that went up by Crofton and it went down 3 and it did not stop at Melford. And I forget where it ended up. Where did it end up? Back over at Green Town Center?
It goes into Bowie Gateway.
Yeah. But it's sort of it's a hollow discussion right now because there's nothing to talk about. So when the thing starts to stabilize, when this project starts to fill up, then obviously we have something to talk about. So I mean, there's a line on the map which makes sense for it to come in and go back out, but we're not there yet.
And it is something we're constantly working on, so it's not something we're going to forget about as a city. It's, you know, it's something that we're constantly trying to improve on. So transit is a topic that is not going to go away.
Right, and maybe at a certain point when we get to the next question, maybe Mike can even point out where those stops are anticipated in what you're looking at. So we're figuring it'll come one day, it's just not there. Now back to Mr. Allen's question, as far as the lead ND goes, you're right, we have registered, the site's already been registered. Yeah, right. And the thing about it is, those design guidelines they run with the property. So whatever contracting party we sell it to has to incorporate those design guidelines into it. So if we're saying that those design guidelines at least meet the fundamentals of lead ND, so whoever buys it and we say, here's this book, you will design your piece and it will conform with that book. And if that book conforms with lead ND design principles, they're moving forward. So when that property conveys to them, they will have to acknowledge that they're designing to that book, that design guideline book.
So if the city approved this conceptual site plan, those kinds of expectations would be conveyed to any potential developer?
Yeah, because it's part of the CSP package, if I'm not mistaken. In the actual application to the county for the CSP, inclusive of the city, that design guideline is part and parcel of the CSP package.
Okay, let's get some questions from this side of the audience, then we'll bounce back. Sir in the green shirt.
With the amount of people that will be moving in, I saw no provision made for a firehouse protection or even a location for churches. For these 2,500 homes that have 10, 20, 30,000 people in it. Is there any provision for firehouse or for police protection? Is everything going to fall into Bowie itself, which would be a difficult area when you get from one part of that to the other to send a fire?
Right. I don't think anything like that would be precluded. They showed a slide that had opportunity sites. I mean, perhaps something in the future, like a church or something, could go to an opportunity site, but in the current planning, I guess it really depends on what the, what the inputs are. If the fire department was looking to locate a station here, they would probably tell them about it and ask them to accommodate it.
We
So,
could try and go to the fire department and say we want to have this built into the community for protection.
We've talked to the fire department, both at the volunteer level and at the county career level. They're both aware of, both agencies are aware of the plan and feel that the existing resources by having 4 stations in Bowie are sufficient. We're going to continue to examine that because, you raise a valid point. So it's an issue we're going to continue to press. In terms of police, rest assured that the police needs for any development of this size will be examined as the project develops. We anticipate needing additional officers as the community grows, whether it's here or another part of the city.
okay, let's get one more and then we'll go to Martha.
Call on the lady in purple. She's been raising her hand for the last half hour.
Okay, we'll skip this side. We'll go to Martha.
So first, I'd really like to thank the city of Bowie for having a stakeholders meeting. I think, back in March, we weren't allowed to ask these questions directly of the people who were planning this development, and I think all of us really appreciate that ability now. And I will say that I'm an economist by training, and I spent, as Joe knows, a day and a half going through all the documents on the plan. So my understanding is that you want to get all the questions out on the table, even if you can't answer them right now.
Yes, your
So
questions are
I
welcome.
kinds of questions, and I don't really expect you to answer them in sequence or we could be here all night. But I have questions about the economic aspects, questions about the environmental aspects, and picking up on some of the points that people made about transportation that weren't mentioned by the gentleman on the traffic study. First of all, the economic benefits. Joe, as you mentioned, that the reason why the housing was stricken from the last CSP was because about 850 residences were suggested, townhomes and apartments, that this wasn't supportive enough of the employment objective. This plan comes in with 2,500 dwelling units. They're allowed now by the Bowie covenants. But how does this contribute? This is like part A of my question on to be specific, this plan has 260,000 square feet for office employment, 100,000 square feet for retail, and 3.5 million feet for residential. Okay, so this is all residential. That's question 1. Question 2 on employment. How many jobs will be created by the additional office space? And I'm not talking about construction costs. Construction costs will be there no matter what you're building. Ultimately, how many more jobs are we talking about creating through the additional office space? And how will the additional residents, how will this affect the job population ratio? I mean, Prince George's County has a problem. 2/3 of the people go elsewhere to work outside of the county and come back again. Is this going to exacerbate that problem? Is it neutral? Or is it going to help the problem by creating more jobs for the residents? And this was a question I really wanted to ask before, 2,500, what's magic about that? Has someone done a calculation that says that this is the magic number that will make the retail work, make the office work? Or is it 1,000 or 5,000? What's the rationale? Who has a study that shows this as opposed to just ending up with a bunch of phased houses coming in and retail still failing and ending up with just one more section of housing? I noticed that this is phased. There's, I think, 4 phases, and it's phased housing over 20 years, but people objected to phased employment uses over 20 years, so why the phasing? Second issue is the environment. I think that, I can't answer all these questions, but I just want to get them in here for the record. In terms of protecting the wetlands, the dense housing does go right up to the stormwater management plan. In fact, my understanding is that these are 5-story apartment buildings that they're talking about going all the way up. It's actually pretty close to the wetlands. The wetlands are swampy area. What will be the impact on 24/7 presence of 2,500 units. The lighting, the noise, the pollution on the wetlands. And I noticed on the recreational chart, the 124 acres seated in the wetlands are counted as recreational areas for the people here, and these are actually very sensitive areas. The executive summary claims that this project will reduce greenhouse gas emissions relative to alternatives. I don't see any evidence here on greenhouse gas emissions in the development plan. Maybe it exists. So we'd like to see that. On the stormwater management form, apparently you all requested and got a waiver from the city from 21B5, the city code of stormwater management guidelines. We have more stringent stormwater management now in the county and state. And the question is, although this infrastructure of ponds was built a long time ago, it doesn't have very much seepage in the ground, pretty much sends it into the Patuxent River. And why shouldn't we hold this to a higher standard, the current standard for stormwater management, given its very sensitive location? I had some more detailed questions about stormwater management thing that I didn't understand, but I think I can ask everybody. Let me just say something, ask a question about the traffic study, but correct me if I'm wrong. This study doesn't look at the impact of congestion on Route 301. It looks at the intersections and how many people are coming in. Okay, so Prince George's County has among the worst congestion and pollution and travel times in the country, according to the Census Department. What will be the impact, and I don't think the traffic study addresses, and I don't think it's intended to address this, what will be the impact on congestion? And anyone living along Governor Bridge Road, you know what I'm talking about. The Bel Air Drive traffic, which I was really pleased to see that the city asked, be looked at. Thank you for that. It's commendable. It says currently there are 8,454 vehicles per day on Bel Air Drive. The city code service level C is 5,190, so it's already exceeding that. Assuming only 5% of residential traffic from Melford goes down Bel Air Drive and 7% of commercial, they say that this will raise the daily trips on Bel Air Drive to 10,043 trips. So the question there, on what basis did one make the assumption that only 5% of the residential people will go down Bel Air Drive? Because that's actually where I always go because it's always so congested on Route 3. Can we have a sensitivity analysis of the traffic on Bel Air Drive with respect to that assumption? Will the increased traffic on Bel Air Drive result in the need for traffic light at Ken Hill Drive and Bel Air Drive? And then finally, as someone else raised this point, the levels of service at Route 3 and 50 and Route 301 and Governor's Bridge Road is skirted around in this report. I'd really like to know what the current, I know that people have done mitigation already. I want to know what the current service level is at those two intersections and what it will be without any future further mitigation at those two intersections, without further mitigation, what these numbers mean for those intersections. Thank you for your patience.
Okay. One comment about transportation with regard to Bel Air Drive. Not only Ken Hill, but what about any of the other roads that feed into Bel Air Drive?
Well, the city has a level service ordinance that we adopted on our own, separate from the county, and it does only apply to city-maintained streets. And so Martha's raising an issue that as we get further into our review, it may require them to do some improvements. It may require them to divert traffic. We're going to have to take that up. So it's a good point that you made, and other city streets would be similarly needed to be tested under our ordinance. So we're going to have to look at that as part of our review. Sir, you got a question in the back?
Is this presentation going to be available online somewhere on the Bowie website or maybe somewhere in St. John's?
We can make it available, yes.
Can you give me a hint of where?
Well, we have a space on the city website where there's all of the information, yeah, and we'll just put it up there.
Thank you.
Any further questions on this side of the room? Ma'am?
To follow up on the comments about the impact on Bel Air Drive and the neighborhoods, as a resident of the neighborhood, not exactly abutting, but I'm in the S section. I'm already having problems, I've been living here for 13 years, with the traffic volume increasing on the side streets. And we have, as a principal, I guess, in the section I live in Bowie, of having no traffic lights and no speed bumps. But I can imagine that with the increase of traffic, bleed off from this development, that it will require more infrastructure, traffic control infrastructure from the city. Speed bumps, more traffic lights, stop signs. There's also going to be that kind of effect on. Is that something that will be addressed by the city? Is sort of the effect on the neighborhoods?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we do have this ordinance, and it's based on total traffic passing by there in a 24-hour period, so it's measured at various points. And if they don't meet our standard, then there will have to be things done in order to address that. So if you might have to widen a road, you might have to divert traffic, you might have to make a street a one-way street. Those are all different scenarios that we'll have to get into when we look at the details of where the trips are going and whether our number is being exceeded. Now, the conceptual site plan criteria, there is a traffic finding that has to be made, but it's principally being done on the larger roads like state and county roads. But that might be a question that could come up as part of our review of conceptual
Right,
site plan.
because, it won't just affect within a half a mile. It will bleed out within a mile and a half,
Yes.
to the neighborhoods.
And how often are you measuring this?
We have, the city puts counters out and they collect data on the streets, but until a development project comes along, there's really no test being applied to the development. So this development is the first one to come along in the area, so we're going to have to look at that very closely.
One of the other things, let me just make a quick comment responding to the concerns raised about spillover into neighborhoods with traffic. The city council adopted a traffic calming policy, maybe 6-8 years ago, in which if any neighborhood is so concerned about traffic that might be generated from its own neighborhood or cut-through traffic, if folks want a presentation from our public works director, and if it's as few as 3 or 4 people or a large delegation, we will send staff to a meeting and explain what the criteria are for speed humps. And I say humps, which are more gentle than bumps, which you see in private parking lots typically. But that policy and the details of it are on the city website. We'd be glad to explain that. Come to any meeting. There are certain thresholds of community support. We don't want to put those in a neighborhood and have everybody say, why'd you do that? So when a community wants that, they meet the threshold of support, that will happen. But we'd be glad to attend or participate in a meeting at any time on neighborhood traffic. Go ahead.
To go along to the Bel Air Drive, we love Bel Air Drive, and what most people don't realize is all the kids that go to Kenilworth cross Bel Air Drive without a crossing guard. And they come through out of Melford, and they do 50, 55 in the morning. There's that one little speed hump right as you cross over Beach Street, and then they just accelerate it. Speed bumps can be very dangerous and detrimental. Why are they going to, will they consider the cameras? Because I know after having a child going back and forth to Tasker, that Kent Hill used to be a speedway, and now it's a much safer drive in the morning. And Bel Air is terrible in the morning.
The state law is very restrictive on speed cameras. They can only be installed within a certain distance of an approved designated school zone. So we couldn't put speed camera on Bel Air Drive between Route 3 and Kent Hill, for example. We have a speed zone near the Bel Air Annex. No doubt folks in here may have noticed that. We have it near the high school and near Tasker. on Kent Hill. So that's the state law. Where we can employ that kind of mechanism, the council has done so, and we think it's affected behavior of drivers and lowered speeds.
No, I disagree with that.
Maybe when the world doesn't just put an empty box, it seems to work.
Okay, lady in the back row, please.
I'm wondering about the affordability of the housing that's supposed to be going in here. If it's envisioned that the people who live there are going to be working there, and all we have is like a convenience store and some restaurants and some little services, I'm just wondering how that's supposed to work. That the people living in Melford Village and working in Melford Village, is that going to work? I'm sure not everybody can work there and live there, but I'm just wondering what the expected housing allowances, housing prices are expected to be, and that the people who work there can afford to live there.
Okay, that's a question I think Andrew Brown can answer.
Yeah, all I can say about that is the Harmony Place units have gone up. I think they went up in August, and right now I think they're at about 85% let, which in the apartment world has been, it's absorbed very, very quickly. I think the rents, and this is from memory, range from somewhere at a low of a one-bedroom from $1,600 to a high of $2,600 for a 3. Obviously, as part of their plan, you've seen that. We're not counting on a ton of 3s. That's not what we want to do. So even in the marketplace, they're predominantly one-bedrooms with a little bit more 2s and hardly any 3s. So your range is somewhere beginning in the 1600s. But that range is in the region. That's just what the market bears, and that's what the market gets. So I don't know how further to answer your question. As far as you saying about having a little store here and a little store there, the more rooftops that we get, it becomes more interesting for the retailers to locate there. I know as a company, I think we're going to take a shot on building some of the retail speculatively at the start, and hope that the project gets enough visibility in the region that we'll be able to, through our connections, say, hey, look, why don't you locate this thing here? The people will be pioneers that are coming out there in the first instance. But as it starts to stabilize, then of course it becomes more attractive, and that's just the way the economics of it work. But back to your affordability, the units will start off at a market rate. And a good indication of that is, I would look at Harmony Place. And their site's online, you can go look at it and see where they're coming in at.
Is that a St. John property?
No.
Mike, you got a question?
Yeah, just a follow-on question. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. Just real quickly, I know it's still early in the process, but can you talk about the vetting process as far as the developers that you hope to entice to come develop on the property? What's going to be the vetting process as far as Will you, St. John's, be the only convening authority to say, hey, this developer gets this particular parcel or not? And then B, if you're not the sole source selection team, will you be grabbing input from the city staff and or citizens of the community? And then lastly, with that in mind, how much economic development kind of goes back to the economic development or economic impact statement that the gentleman in the back talked about. How readily will you make yourself or make this particular project available to potential small businesses, minority-owned businesses, so on and so forth here within the area to take part in the development of this community?
Well, we are the master developer of the property, but the sheer scale of that with the 2,500 units, when we're talking about these large-scale neighborhoods and just the economies of it. When you have a 350-unit apartment building, I mean, that's got to be every bit of $50 or $75 million just to construct the thing. So when you're starting to talk about the scale of that, and I wouldn't want to go and say, let's sell 10 townhome units to Joe Blow. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. What'll end up happening more than likely, I can't guarantee it, but all things being equal, you'll probably have a situation where one of the big home builders, and I'm going to just throw out names, but we're not talking them, it's just to give you an example, you see their signs, but a Hovnanian or a KB, all those big guys. It's groups like that will come in and say, look, we would like to take half of the east side neighborhood and take 216 units of townhomes and one wrap building. And that's what we want to do. So that's probably what's going to happen. And St. John will be the sole person they'll be dealing with. We're the contract party. But again, they're bound by these design guidelines. So, and that's the point, because what we want to have, like we do have up at Maple Lawn Farms in Howard County, I'd encourage people to go look at that. But these large-scale mixed-use master plan communities, that's what you want. You want the whole thing to look nice all the way through, because if it starts to degrade, we obviously wouldn't get the higher returns on the back end. So we want everybody to stick with the program, and it's fairly prescriptive. I mean, you can have changes in the look of the building, but the quality is always the same. It's always prescribed high. As far as the minority aspect goes, I think in the initial resolution, I see Councilmember Gardner in the back, is we said, of course, we would have encourage minority participation and have everyone have a shot at it. But what I have said from the jump is, you know, we're a business. If the groups come in and say, look, here's our CV, this is what we've done, we're bondable, we can complete jobs. What I'm not going to do is say, all right, we're going to give you guys 25% more. You know, if the bid to build something is $1 and you come in at $4, I'm not going to say, well, here's $4 and let's see your references, and no one's ever completed a job, you can't get bonding. I'm not going to sign a contract, because that would be insane for everybody concerned.
But the important thing in terms of local subs and minority contractors is to get a commitment, and we did get that commitment, and it's written into the covenants that were approved. The process can work on this project here in a much broader sense, similar to how it worked at City Hall. The council wanted minority participation by subs. And without a local mandate, we ended up with 25% of this project involving minority subcontractors, all of whom were local within the region. And, you know, it's an emphasis that we need to remember to place on the builder and developer.
Yeah, and like I said, Councilman Gardner put the language in and we adopted it, so we're comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Okay, it's about 9:15. I guess we want to wrap up as soon as we've exhausted all of the topics. So does anyone have a new topic? Let's go here.
I actually have a very, very specific question. You talk about wanting to maintain quality. Are SDC ratings part of the requirements? Because you include that with, you include the architecture, how it's supposed to look. But STC ratings, and what are they going to be? Because finishings are nice, finishings are temporary. Buildings are for much longer term.
STC ratings, for those who don't know, is sound transmission coefficient. It has to do with how sound travels through the particularly multifamily units where that's an issue. And that's more of a building code issue. That's sort of at the micro level of the actual architecture, and there are standards that govern that in the building codes.
Yeah, standards are low though.
I'm trying to answer your question.
Sorry.
In the design guidelines, we have specifically omitted everything that has to do with specific building codes requirements. So the answer to your question is the design guidelines really deal with issues of design, spatial, materials, colors, proportions, textures, detailing, but they don't get into codes.
Well, they do talk about, lighting for livability and
Lighting, signage, all those things are addressed in the guidelines,
So
but these aren't building code issues.
So it's going to be 50 and not 60 most likely.
We have not addressed the SDC ratings at this point.
And I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about the overall process, what steps are subsequent to where we are tonight. This is only the conceptual site plan, but eventually they're going to go through subdivision to create all of those areas to sell to different builders. And then as the builders come in, each one will have to go through a detailed site plan review, at which time we will look at architecture and we will discuss questions like the one that was just asked about the sound attenuation. So there will be an opportunity, and again, the way that the City Council structured the latest covenant revision is that it gave the city the ability to approve the detailed site plan before they go to the county. So we have a direct role, and we will try to hold their feet to the fire, so to speak, to make sure that they live up to the framework that Andrew described. Let's take a couple more questions, sir.
Is the sewage pumping station capable of handling 2,500 units?
The sewage goes to WSSC, and do you have an answer to that? I assume that it is.
It's over in the corner of...
Yeah, right. But it was built to serve the ultimate development of the site.
The ultimate development has changed. You're talking about 2,500 units now as opposed to 800 as opposed to something that's...
Right. It will have to. It's an evaluation that will specifically occur at preliminary plan of subdivision as an adequate public facility. And I will say that to the extent that the capacity is not there, and we believe it is there, well, we have to validate that a little farther down the process. To the extent that it isn't there, we won't be able to extend lines and services to other developments. So that development essentially would be a moratorium, wouldn't be allowed to proceed any further without adequate water and sewage systems. We believe it'll be there, in short, but it'll be clearly determined at preliminary plan of subdivision, which is a later step.
Whose service is it then?
It's WSSC.
Water and sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Any other question, ma'am?
Yeah, I know Martha asked a lot of questions, but specifically, I was wondering if you gentlemen could address one of her questions, which was, how did we come up with the number 2,500? Did we throw a dart at a board, or I mean, how did that number come up? Because
Yeah,
I don't know how it went from 850 to 2,500.
Well,
We're talking about what,
it was a different program back then. I mean, it were primarily single-family homes, a lot of them, and that's where they got the 850 from. Where the 2,500 comes from is if you read the Basu report, I think that's online, right?
No, I didn't read anything.
Oh, you didn't read anything. Well, basically, Honorable Basu did a report and just said, look, this area could sustain and probably needs this amount of units, and he just kind of took a look at, pardon me?
It needs?
Would like, the area would like to have this amount of units. There was a shortage of those types of units. So he's saying in his study, you should read it, it's not that long, but he goes through the methodology of how he comes up with that number. The other thing is, we probably could go north of 2,500. So I'm fairly convinced we could go higher than that, but we're right back to where we were on the traffic, that you have the need that Basu's saying is wanted by the community or wanted by the marketplace. But Mike Lenhart over there is telling me that you have traffic capacity of X. So right now, they both kind of harmonize out at 2,500 units. If I do 4,500 units, then I have to do significant amounts of new traffic mitigation measures, and they've already been taken care of. So it just happens that they both kind of flopped in on top of each other and settled out at that number. So it's one and the other mixing together. That's how we got the number.
Sir, a question for the city. I guess the 55 plus and the 2,500 apartments in small towns seems to be at odds with the idea of what used to be the Science Center when I first started, being a high-tech medical thing. Is the city really given up and decided to go light industrial?
Well,
how was that evolution?
I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but the first 10 minutes I talked about the past history of this, and on March 4th of last year, the council voted to support a covenant amendment that would allow the residential to be considered here. So that was a policy change. And to get to one of the points Martha made about, what's different about the circumstances now versus the old plan that was not accepted by the county council, that I read several of the reasons from the county council's decision that said why they could not approve it then. Part of that was that the plan was not integrated well enough with what was around it. And I think that was a real shortcoming of that prior residential proposal. So even though it had a lot less units on it, it didn't do as well of a job of design integration as this plan appears to be doing. So I think that's one of the things that has changed. And the council, when they grappled with this on March 4th, had the benefit of some information from an expert in mixed-use development who came and spoke at a prior meeting, talking about when you combine uses, you end up attracting more employers. Employers want to be at the hot spot where things are really happening. So mixed-use development has been shown to create greater economic development opportunities, and I think that's part of the rationale for why the City Council decided to go in this direction.
Well, that kind of really wasn't my point, but my point is that the apartments and small townhouses is not the kind of housing that the high-tech medical people who are already there really want. I mean, we go live in Annapolis and Crawford. So I guess I'm not sure why this focus on the 2,500 density, unless your philosophy now is that Science Park is really going to be light industrial and you're giving up on the high-tech medical.
Well, I think your question goes back to one of the earlier questions about the composition of what kind of residential you're going to have, and is this plan really the best idea? Could there be other ingredients worked in that would address those multiple economic scales of the
And that's why I was trying to ask what the city's mindset is in terms of that.
Well, at this point, we're only at the beginning, and the council said it's okay to look at residential, and this is the very first iteration of that. So, the input is well received.
I don't have a problem with residential, it's the kind of residential.
Right, we got it. Okay, any other new topics? Okay, we'd like to wrap up. One more question over here.
What are your triggers for moving from one phase to another? Is it the percent of utilization? Is it ground cover? Is it that you have a certain amount of businesses versus homes filled? What is your triggers to move from one neighborhood to another neighborhood? And is that your process? Is one neighborhood to another neighborhood, or is it all, you tell me.
I don't think there's
Yes.
phasing. Is there phasing?
The answer is yes. It's everything you mentioned in combinations, it's all of that. Where we stand, do we feel that the market's getting in the right way? I mean, if all of a sudden our indicators, economic indicators are like nobody wants to get involved with condos or townhomes right now, I can't imagine we're going to have a load of townhome people coming in and say, I want to take down 300 units. Truly, I'm not being cute. The answer is yes to everything you said. We'd analyze all those different points.
So it could change based upon what people are interested in. If people aren't buying the condos or filling those condos, you could say, well, we have someone else who wants to build townhomes, and we're going to go with that in this particular neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So
that's the whole point of why it's illustrative, and there's a cap, but it floats around, and you've got that. Because in a sense, that's one of the reasons we're here today, was back in '83 or whatever, it was so prescriptive, they said, you shall do this, and the market has not materialized like it was in 1983. That's why we're in the problem we have today.
Okay, I'd like to close the meeting just by saying that we don't have any public hearings scheduled yet. You've learned a lot about the proposal. We've gotten a lot of good comments down for consideration. We will post those on the website after we've compiled them. If anyone has any questions about where we go from here, please don't hesitate to contact me in the planning department, and we will be sticking around later. If you have any questions, you can linger after the meeting. So thank you and good night. Feel free to submit questions, yes.
Thank you for taking the time to go through this. It was
My pleasure.
a good presentation.
Thank you.